If you'd like to open your Bibles to Mark chapter 2. Mark chapter 2. Before I got in ministry, I worked for probably a few years at an insurance company in Searcy, Arkansas. And it's an interesting group of people that I worked with. Some people that it's one of those good things about social media, I guess, Kyle. That I follow some of them on Facebook and get to see what they're doing in life now a lot of years later. It's kind of neat to see all that. There was one lady there at the insurance company whose name was Sue. And Sue was just the nicest, sweetest lady in the world. I was probably in my mid-20s, I guess, at the time. Sue probably had about 35 or 40 years on me, if I had to guess. I don't know. But Sue was just nice and kind and always had a smile for people. And at the same time was probably the most underappreciated person at that company. And she was mistreated a lot of times, I thought, and I really felt bad for Sue sometimes, but I tried to encourage her as best I could. I always appreciated the work that she did. But one thing I learned about Sue really early on was Sue had no peripheral vision at all. And so you could walk up next to Sue at her desk and then just wait. And as you would stand there, Sue had no idea you were standing right next to her. And eventually she would turn for something on the side of her desk and almost jump out of her chair. And 20-something me thought this was the funnest game in the world. So if I ever needed something from Sue, if I approached her desk, I wouldn't say a word. I would just kind of quietly come up and then just wait. And at some point I realized I should probably stop doing this because I'm going to give Sue a heart attack one of these days. But it was so much fun, and Sue was always, unlike what Kyle was talking about a minute ago, caught off guard. And I appreciate those thoughts, the idea that God is not caught off guard by the pandemic or caught off guard by all our political stuff over the last week. And it made me think of Sue, but it also made me think of a line that was in our devotional book we've been reading as a family over the last couple weeks now. And the sentence was, God is never caught off guard. Isn't that a neat thought? All the things in life that have come along and surprised us, whether for good or bad, God is never caught off guard. He knows what's coming. And so for us in life, those things that catch us off guard, knock us off our feet, God knows already. God knows what we need to make it through. God is standing by willing to help us if we will just ask him. And so I want you to think in those terms as we look at these stories in Mark 2. All of these things that happen that people don't expect to happen in the way that they do. Things that they don't believe Jesus is capable of doing, things that they don't believe Jesus should be doing, things they think he should do, but maybe at a different time. Jesus is not caught off guard either. They are, but he's not. And he's ready for everything that's about to happen and the questions that come his way. Now, we're going to do something a little different today. Usually I will come to a chapter in the gospel and I will try to pick out a story or two that I feel like fit what we're doing. As I look through Mark 2, they all fit what we're talking about. So we're going to try to make it through all of them, and I will try not to do the thing that I've been known to do that my wife will sometimes tell me about later on the way home, which is talk way too fast because I'm trying to make it through all of them. I will talk at whatever speed I can. There are points along the way that we will read and points where I will just kind of tell the story, but I think they all interrelate in a way. So we're going to try to talk about all these stories here in Mark chapter 2, starting in verse 1. When he returned to Capernaum, after some days, it was reported that he was at home. And many were gathered together so that there was no more room, not even at the door. And he was preaching the word to them. And they came, bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 men. And when they could not get near him because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him. And when they had made an opening, they let down the bed on which the paralytic lay. This is his greatest desire, I believe, in this moment, is to be healed. I was reading a book about this particular chapter, and one of the things the author said was that everyone who is paralyzed dreams of the opportunity to walk. I don't know if that's true or not. I've never been in the position to want that, but it seems to make good sense to me. I think for this man, as he wants desperately to walk and finds these people who are willing to take him to Jesus because he has heard that Jesus can heal, he has probably dreamed of this day for a good bit of his life. If there was just an opportunity to change this thing in life. And I don't know that we can completely associate with the paralytic if we have not been there in that situation, but I think most of us have something that's like this. And if not, those of us in the room, I guarantee you people in our world have things that are like this, that they have thought, if I could just change this thing. It reminds me of a quote by Jim Carrey, of all people. And I don't like a lot of Jim Carrey's social commentary. He makes me laugh when he does physical commentary or physical comedy in movies. But I've always liked this quote of his. He says, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer." We feel like if we had all of those things that we had dreamed of, if we could have wealth and fame, if we could have something about us physically that we would like changed. What if I were taller? What if I were thinner? What if I were younger? What if I had more hair? What if I had all these different things? What if this malady I had in this man's situation? What if this paralysis I have, the inability to walk, what if that was taken away? How different could my life be? And I think a lot of us walk through life convinced of that we have had the deck stacked against us. And if we could just have this one thing changed, then everything would be different. So if this is his greatest desire, I'd ask you, what is your greatest desire? Or at least in terms of these things that are outside of your control, that you just feel like if this thing was changed in my life, everything could be different. If financially I was in a different spot, if my debt was taken away, if I had the money to get this thing, if I had this health-wise, if I were in this place, if this job I interviewed for had come through, what if this one thing could change? And a lot of people will live life paralyzed by that one thing. They're not on a mat being carried by friends to Jesus, but their lives have been paralyzed by this thing that they just feel like, I will never be what I could be without this thing being changed. And because this thing can't be changed, then I'm just stuck. So this man is taken to Jesus, and he's brought to a point where there's every reason why he shouldn't be able to get in, and his friends come up with this great plan of, let's just open the roof up. Of all the things that have happened to me during sermons, and there have been a lot of things that have happened to me during sermons, I have had people collapse during sermons, not because of the sermon, I hope. I have seen people who have got up and left, and then I've wondered, were they upset about something? And come to find out later, yes, they were. Or come to find out later, no, it had nothing to do with that. I have been preaching a sermon in Eugene, Oregon, where a person I did not know came in the back door and walked to the center aisle and then began walking down. And I kept thinking, she's looking for a seat. She's looking for a place to sit. And she walked up and stood right about there and just looked at me. You want to talk about being knocked off your game just a little bit? I didn't know what to do. And fortunately for me, one of my elders thought this is probably not going to work well and came up and guided her to her seat and talked to her. And come to find out later, she just needed help financially with something. All kinds of things have happened, but what has not happened is tiles begin to be removed and then someone lowered down from the ceiling. Could you imagine what that would be like this morning? So here's this man lowered down from the ceiling by his friends. And it says, Jesus saw their faith. And he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Jesus sees something more important than what they've come for. And I will tell you that Jesus, that God, that the Spirit have not stopped this habit as we sit here today. Whatever that thing is that's your greatest desire, that you feel like if I could just have this changed, God is not taken off guard by that. And God knows every bit that there may be something more important than that thing that you're concerned about. And so sometimes the answer that God brings is not the one you're looking for. There would be a part of me, if I'm this man being lowered from the ceiling onto the floor before Jesus, who has just dreamed of this day of coming here and maybe being healed and being able to walk again, there would be just a small part of me that would think, sins being forgiven sounds good, Jesus, but that's not why we're here today. We're here for something different. You may have noticed I'm on a mat, and here I lie before you. And what I need is not forgiveness of sins right now. What I need is to be able to walk. Some of the scribes were sitting there, questioning in their hearts. And think of all the things that have happened to this point. Jesus is teaching what he's teaching. Man lowered from ceiling before him. Jesus says sins are forgiven. And what do they center in on? Why does this man speak like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? And honestly, it's a pretty good question, isn't it? Who can forgive sins? And they answer the question. And maybe this would bring to us another question that we may think of, which is, who can forgive? If we want to get past this idea of just who can forgive sins, who can forgive in the first place? What if this morning, I was trying to think of who I want to pick on today. What if Trevin sitting over here and Jake sitting over here, they keep looking at each other with anger in their eyes, which would be funny to begin with. But they're looking at each other with anger in their eyes, and finally they've had enough. And Jake stands up and walks over to Trevin and just knocks him out cold on the floor. Now, first of all, it would be the most interesting thing that's happened all morning, but we revive Trevin. Luckily, he has a medical professional in the family. We revive Trevin. We get him back up. Jake walks back to his seat like nothing has happened. And I walk over to Jake and I say, Jake, it's okay. I forgive you. Trevin would probably look, if he remembers everything that just happened at that point, and think, well, hang on a second. You can't forgive him. Only I can do that, and I'm not there yet. I'm still trying to figure out what in the world just happened. Who can forgive? The one who's been wronged, right? We get that concept. So when Jesus forgives sins, who can forgive sins? God. And I think we will see this theme running throughout this chapter and what Jesus does, what he says, how he does it, when he does it. Jesus is claiming to be God throughout this chapter. I am amazed as I read about the things that atheists will say about Jesus to try to convince us that he really is not who he says he is. One of the common arguments nowadays is that he doesn't claim to be God. If you walk away from Mark 2 thinking Jesus doesn't claim to be God, you need to read Mark 2 again. Because everything he does in Mark 2 is a claim to be God. Who can forgive sins? Who can have this man sitting before him and forgive the sins? God can do that. So as Jesus forgives sins, it's just the beginning of him saying, this is someone different standing before you. And Jesus knows their thoughts and their questions, and he ends up healing the man anyway. So this man is going to get up, and he's going to leave with forgiveness of sins and the ability to walk. And these folks who ask the question and know the answer are going to be left with a lot more questions. We skip down to verse 13. In a different situation, he went out again beside the sea, and the crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, follow me. And he rose and followed him. And as he reclined at a table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? Or basically, why does he hang around with them? Why is he with these people? These are not godly people. These are not the kind of people that someone who says they're from God should be with. And they're confused by it. Of all the people you may choose if you were Jesus and you had come to earth and you want to pick influential communicators, leaders, however you may think of, to pick disciples, how far down the list in that culture would you have to get before you hit tax collector? We read last week about him picking fishermen, and that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense either to us, does it? And now tax collector? And not only does he choose this tax collector, and maybe they think, well, he's going to reform the tax collector. He's going to get him out of this and make him different, so maybe there's something positive there. But no, now he sits down and he's having dinner with tax collectors and with sinners. Why is he with these people? And Jesus heard it, verse 17. And he said to them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. Who would have a greater need of Jesus than tax collectors and sinners? Or maybe if he were to ask this with another question, why wouldn't I? Isn't that the greater question here? If these folks are in need of God, if these folks are in need of a Savior, why would I not be around them? Doesn't make any sense. And so he takes their thinking and he turns it back and makes them think about it in a different way. And I believe that's the second thing that Jesus is doing throughout this chapter. He's clearly claiming to be God in what he does and how he does it and when he does it. But he also is trying to make people think about things in a way they have not thought about it before. And I believe as human beings, that may be one of the most complicated things for us to do. Because when our minds get set in a certain direction, man, it's hard to change them. When we believe something to be true, when we start to act based on that, it is very difficult for us to undo that thinking and to change it. It's difficult for us to see things in a way that we have been unwilling to see them before. And so for them, he says, you've got to reset your thinking of, It doesn't make sense for a religious person to be around sinners, because how else are you going to tell the sinners about God unless you are there around them? Not becoming like them, not becoming less godly in the process, but there with them to show them that you care, with them to have a relationship with them so that they may change. Now John's disciples, verse 18, and the Pharisees were fasting. And people came and said to him, why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? Why don't your disciples do this? Why don't they fast? I think we see something about these people if we've not picked up on it yet. What are they looking for? How do we go into situations? What are we looking for? Are we looking for something that is good? Are we looking for positive things? Or are we looking to find fault? Are we looking for the negative things? Are we looking for something that we can correct, something that we can criticize? And I will tell you that most of us know someone that's who they are. Their personality, the things that they do, the way they tend to approach life is in a critical way. And for the most part, those folks aren't all that enjoyable to be around, are they? Because no matter what I do, no matter how good all these things are, if there is something within it that is a flaw, that's the thing that will be noticed. And so now, of all the things Jesus and the disciples are doing, what these folks notice is, you're not fasting. Why aren't you fasting? And Jesus says, can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. There's a time and place for this, basically what he's saying. They'll fast, but not right now, because the purpose of fasting is something different than this. The purpose of fasting is not served by them doing it here now while I'm with them, because we need to do something different. And I think he'll expand on this even a little more when you look to the Sermon on the Mount, which is, how do you fast according to Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount? Not with bad looks on your faces to be seen by people, but in secret, where the Heavenly Father sees. This shouldn't be something that everyone else notices anyway. This should be just something that you are doing and is between you and God. So why would they even notice that you're not fasting? Because the way they do it is to be noticed. And it really tells a little more as they ask this question about them than it does about the disciples of Jesus. The way Jesus wants things done is going to be entirely different. Everything's about to change. And he's bracing them for this throughout the chapter, but they're still not quite there, because when your mind is set one way, man, it's hard for it to go in a different direction. On one Sabbath, verse 23, he was going through their grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And the Pharisees were saying to him, look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? So they asked basically the question, what about the Sabbath? These guys are walking along, they're picking these heads of grain. That's not okay. Why are they doing this? Why are you all right with that? And what we need to understand is they have these 39 activities. And these 39 activities that they cannot do on the Sabbath. They've made a list. We go back to the Old Testament, we find the Sabbath, and God says to rest in this time, because on the seventh day of creation, he rests as well, and so we're going to have this day of rest. And then gradually, folks decided, well, we need something a little more specific than that. We need the way we would think of it, we need a thou shalt not here. And so they come up with this list of 39 things that you can't do on the Sabbath. And one of them is reaping grain. Now, I will tell you, if you were to walk through a field of grain, I think of my brother-in-law is a farmer in Nebraska, and he has all these fields of corn and wheat and sunflowers and all kinds of things. If I were to walk through a field of grain and pick a couple heads off of some grain, I would almost guarantee you that what my brother-in-law would say I was doing is not reaping grain. That was the intent of these 39 activities, that we're not going to go through and harvest a field on the Sabbath and do this at this point in time. His disciples come along, pick a couple heads off the grain, and they question it, because this is not the way we think this rule is supposed to work. And they're perplexed by it. And so he says to them, clicking ahead, have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, and he and those who were with him? And then he commences to tell this story about David going in and eating the bread that was only for the priests to eat. And it appears that David, and the way that Jesus tells the story, David and those who are with him, as they go in and eat this, he's okay with that. And God doesn't mind because, again, there is a purpose to what David is doing. David is not there to disrespect God. David is not there to say, hey, look at what I've done. But David is hungry, and there is this bread, and God allows for this thing to happen. And for the people who are there criticizing each of these things along the way, who is he to forgive? Who is he to be with tax collectors and to be with sinners? Who is he to do these things on the Sabbath? They've forgotten what the purpose of all of these things are. Why did God give us these guidelines? It wasn't just random. It wasn't just to see what we would do. It was something that had a purpose behind it. And they are so concerned about the letter of the law that they have forgotten there's a purpose behind this law. And more than that, Jesus said, and we skip by this verse, he said that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. He calls himself the Son of Man. If we've had any doubt to this point, as he does all these things in the way that he does it, in the time that he does it, as he forgives, and only God could be the one who forgives sin, that he is saying that he is the Son of God, now he uses this term, Son of Man, which to you and I maybe doesn't mean a lot, but for Jesus, throughout the gospel, this is the way he refers to himself most often, the Son of Man. And it is an echo to people who would know the Old Testament scriptures as they would to the book of Daniel. In Daniel chapter 7, it says, I saw in night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. He is the forgiver of sins. Early on, as this man is lowered from the ceiling, he's then the bridegroom as he talks about why his disciples are not fasting, and the bridegroom is there with him, and now he is the Son of Man. Over and over, Jesus is claiming that he is God with us. As we began the book of Mark a couple weeks ago, we thought, well, why does Mark skip by all the baby Jesus stuff? Matthew and Luke, this is very important to them. And even John, even though he doesn't talk about the child Jesus, he goes all the way back to the beginning to explain all of this. Why does Mark jump right into adult Jesus? And Mark tells us the same things, but just in a different way. This is God with us. And all throughout chapter 2, we see that Jesus is God with us. And as Jesus is not caught off guard throughout this chapter, neither is God. Because God's plan from the beginning was that Jesus would be God with us as he is here. And as we look at him, what do we learn today? We learn that whatever that thing is that we desire the most, God understands that, but sometimes God knows that there is something even more important than that. Whatever thing you think, well, my life would be better if I could just, what you're doing in that moment is what we talked about Wednesday night if you were here. Wednesday night we looked at Galatians chapter 3. And the struggle in the book of Galatians, if you've not read through it, and I'd encourage you to if you're not with us here on Wednesdays, the struggle is between the Jewish Christians and the Gentile Christians. The Gentile Christians have come in and they're following Jesus, and the Jewish Christians say, well, that's all fine and good, but you still need to keep the works of the law. And specifically, they're talking about circumcision throughout the book of Galatians. And basically what they have come up with, we talked about on Wednesday night, is a formula. And that formula is what you need to be okay with God is Jesus plus works of the law. And we talked some on Wednesday about how what we tend to do, if we're not careful, is we say what you need is Jesus plus blank. And insert whatever you will in the blank. And we talked about how we don't like that idea, and hopefully we don't do that. I think we do that individually at times too. And what we have convinced ourselves is what I need is Jesus plus blank. I've seen a t-shirt a couple times now that I need a little bit of coffee and a whole lot of Jesus. And I laugh when I see that because I think, well, actually, and the people in the office will attest to this, I actually need a whole lot of coffee and a whole lot of Jesus. But I don't need Jesus plus coffee. I don't need Jesus plus whatever that thing that my greatest desire is to be fixed. And honestly, this guy at the beginning of chapter 2 doesn't need Jesus plus to walk out off of that mat that day, although that's exactly what he gets. What he needs is Jesus. And so whatever our greatest desire is, God is not caught off guard by the idea it's our greatest desire, but God also knows something better than what we know. And when we see people out in our world that don't look like us or act like us, behave like us, have the same values we have. God understands that we are to reach out to those people too. And when we look at Jesus turning these rules that they're accustomed to on their head and doing things in a different way, God was there to make those rules in the first place. He wasn't surprised Jesus would do that in a way that would cause everyone to question it and to wonder what's going on. God has not been caught off guard by any of that. And whatever in your life is your struggle today, God is not caught off guard by that either. This morning, whatever that thing is that you feel like you need to make life right, I will tell you, instead of that thing, what you need is Jesus. And if you have never followed him, let this be the day that that changes. Or if you have followed him, but along the way, you have allowed that other thing that is your greatest desire to take your focus off of him, let that be changed today. Know that he is the most important thing in your life. And all of those other things, maybe they'll be fixed, maybe they won't. But when we have Jesus in our lives, all those other things are secondary. This morning, if you've not followed him, or if you need to take on his way again, if you need to ask for the forgiveness of those in the church or of the one who has the ability to truly forgive you, please come while we stand and sing.